Victor and Sarah's wedding was the happiest day of their lives. They had dreamed of building a beautiful family together, and when Sarah became pregnant just a few months after their marriage, their joy knew no bounds. But their happiness was short-lived. Only a month into the pregnancy, Sarah suffered a miscarriage. It was a devastating loss, one that left them both heartbroken. They held on to hope, believing that they would soon conceive again. Days turned into months, and months into years. The couple visited countless doctors, underwent numerous tests, and tried every medical option available. Yet, the answer was always the same. There was nothing physically wrong with them. It's just a matter of time, the doctors would say. But time was not kind to them. 9 years passed, and still they remained childless. Sarah, though deeply hurt, never gave up hope. She prayed, fasted, and encouraged Victor, telling him that their time would come. But Victor was growing weary. He was tired of waiting. The whispers from friends, family, and even strangers had begun to get to him. A man without a child is not truly a man, they said. Those words haunted him. That was when he met Wura. Wura was everything Sarah wasn't. Young, vibrant, and full of life. She gave Victor the attention he craved and filled the void in his heart. Slowly, he began to drift away from Sarah. At first, he made excuses to stay out late, claiming he had work meetings. Then, he stopped showing Sarah any affection, barely speaking to her unless necessary. Sarah noticed the change but convinced herself that Victor was just stressed. She had no idea that her husband had a secret lover. As Victor spent more and more time with Wura, his guilt began to fade. He told himself he deserved happiness, that it wasn't his fault Sarah couldn't give him a child. Then one evening, Wura called him with news that shook his entire world. "I'm pregnant," she said. Victor's heart pounded. "Are you serious?" he asked, excitement flooding his voice. "Yes," Wura confirmed. That night, for the first time in years, Victor felt truly happy. Without thinking, he rushed to Wura's house, spending the night with her. He didn't even bother making up an elaborate lie for Sarah, just a simple excuse about an important business meeting. Sarah, trusting and loving as always, replied, "It's okay, my love. Just take care of yourself." Little did she know, her world was about to be shattered. Sarah sat alone in the living room, staring at the empty seat beside her. It had been weeks since Victor last spent quality time with her. She missed him. The way he used to hold her, the way they used to laugh together, the way he used to reassure her that no matter what happened, they would always have each other. But things had changed. Victor had become distant. He barely spoke to her, and when he did, it was short and cold. His late nights became more frequent, and his excuses became weaker. "Another business meeting?" she asked one evening, watching as he buttoned his shirt in a hurry. "Yes, it's important," Victor replied without making eye contact. Sarah forced a smile. "Okay, just take care of yourself." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust that her husband was telling the truth, but deep down something felt wrong. Meanwhile, Victor was living a double life. Every evening he found comfort in Wura's arms. She was carrying his child. Something Sarah had never been able to do for him. He felt like a real man again, like his life finally had meaning. "You need to start thinking about the future," Wura whispered one evening as they lay together. "What do you mean?" Victor asked. "I mean us, me and the baby. I don't want to be your secret forever, Victor. I deserve more than this." Victor sighed, running a hand over his face. "Wura, you know I can't just walk away from Sarah. We've been married for years." "But she's not giving you what you need," Wura argued. "I am, and soon I'll be the mother of your child. Don't you think I deserve to be in your home, to be called your wife?" Victor felt a sharp pang of guilt. He had never considered leaving Sarah. But now, with Wura pregnant, he knew the truth would come out eventually. "Just give me some time," he said. Wura frowned but didn't push further. She had her own plans. Weeks passed, and Wura's pregnancy became more visible. She was getting tired of being hidden, tired of sneaking around. One evening, as Victor was getting ready to leave her apartment, she made a decision. "I'm tired of this, Victor. I'm coming to your house," she said firmly. Victor's eyes widened. "What? No, you can't do that." "I can, and I will. I'm carrying your child, and I refuse to be treated like a dirty little secret. If you don't introduce me to your wife, I'll introduce myself." Victor felt panic rise in his chest. "Wura, please, don't do this. You don't understand. Sarah will never forgive me." Wura crossed her arms. "That's not my problem, Victor. You'll see me at your house soon." Victor's heart pounded as he left. He had lost control, and soon everything would come crashing down. The evening was peaceful. Sarah and Victor sat together in the living room, watching a TV show. Even though their marriage had lost its warmth, Sarah was grateful for moments like this. She hoped that with time, Victor would return to her completely. A sudden knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "I'll get it," Sarah said, standing up. Victor felt his stomach tighten. He had a terrible feeling about this. Sarah opened the door, and there stood a woman she had never seen before. Pregnant, with a small travel bag at her feet. Sarah blinked in confusion. "Sorry, who are you?" The woman smirked. "I see you may not know me, but I'm not an empty, barren woman like you." Sarah's heart clenched at the cruel words. "Excuse me?" she asked, her voice shaking. Before she could say more, Victor appeared behind her. His breath caught in his throat as he saw Wura standing there, looking smug. Victor's worst nightmare had just become a reality. "Who is this lady?" Sarah asked, turning to her husband. Victor was frozen, his lips parted, but no words came out. He felt trapped, exposed. "I'm waiting, Victor. Who is she?" Sarah's voice cracked. Victor swallowed hard and looked down. I'm sorry, Sarah." Sarah took a step back, shaking her head. "Sorry? What do you mean?" Wura folded her arms. "I'll tell you exactly who I am. I am Wura, your husband's woman. And this," she pointed to her belly, "is his child. I'm here to stay." Sarah felt the air leave her lungs. The room spun as her world shattered. She turned to Victor, hoping, praying that this was some horrible mistake. "Victor, tell me she's lying." Victor's silence was louder than any confession. Tears filled Sarah's eyes. "Is this what we promised each other? To love and stand by each other no matter what?" Victor ran a hand through his hair. "Sarah, I never wanted to hurt you, but after 9 years of waiting, I just thought—" "You thought what?" Sarah cut him off. "That betraying me was the answer? That having a child with another woman would fix things?" Victor looked away. He had no defense. Sarah's entire body trembled as pain, anger, and betrayal consumed her. She had loved Victor with all her heart, endured the pain of childlessness, and stood by his side despite everything. And this was how he repaid her? She wiped her tears and took a deep breath. "I won't stay where I'm not wanted." She turned and walked past Victor, heading straight to their bedroom. Within minutes, she packed her belongings. Victor watched helplessly as she walked out the door with her suitcase. "Sarah, please," he called after her. But she didn't stop. She didn't even look back. And just like that, their 9-year marriage ended in silence. Victor sat in the dimly lit living room, staring at the door Sarah had walked out of just hours ago. His mind was clouded with regret, but deep inside he told himself that he had made the right decision. He wanted a child. He deserved one. Wura, however, sat comfortably on the couch, rubbing her belly with a victorious smirk. "Now that she's gone, we can finally start our family properly," she said. Victor glanced at her, but he felt no joy. Instead, an uneasy feeling settled in his chest. Sarah had been his rock for 9 years, and now she was gone. Days turned into weeks and Wura fully settled into Victor's house. But things were not as she had imagined. Victor barely spoke to her, and though he tried to act happy about the pregnancy, there was always a shadow of sadness in his eyes. One evening, Wura confronted him. "What is wrong with you? You should be happy. I gave you what Sarah couldn't." Victor sighed, rubbing his temples. "You don't understand, Wura. I loved Sarah." Wura scoffed. "If you loved her, you wouldn't have been with me." Victor had no answer. He had convinced himself that he was doing what was best for his future, but why did it feel so empty? Months passed, and Wura's due date was approaching. Victor tried his best to care for her, but the guilt of losing Sarah still weighed on him. Then, one afternoon, he received the call. "Victor, it's time. I'm in labour." Wura's voice came through the phone. Victor rushed to the hospital, a strange mix of excitement and anxiety coursing through him. When he arrived, Wura was already in the delivery room. After hours of labour, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Victor's heart swelled with happiness as he held the tiny child in his arms. "My son," he whispered, pressing a gentle kiss on the baby's forehead. At that moment, all his doubts faded. He had finally become a father. But his joy was short-lived. Moments later, the doctor walked in, holding a clipboard with a serious expression. "Mr. Victor, we need to run some tests on the baby. He requires a blood transfusion, and we need to check if you're a match." Victor nodded. "Of course. I'll do anything for my son." The tests were done quickly, and Victor waited patiently for the results, but when the doctor returned, his face was unreadable. "Mr. Victor, your blood type does not match the baby's." Victor's heart skipped a beat. What? What do you mean?" The doctor hesitated before speaking. "Sir, I'm afraid you are not the biological father of this child." Victor's world crashed around him. He stormed into Wura's hospital room, his hands shaking with anger. "Who is the father of this baby, Wura?" Wura looked away, her lips trembling. I thought it was you, but it's my other boyfriend. I'm sorry, Victor." Victor felt like the air had been knocked out of his lungs. His hands balled into fists, his vision blurred with rage and betrayal. "You used me?" he whispered, his voice filled with pain. Wura looked down, unable to meet his eyes. "I didn't plan for this to happen." Victor let out a bitter laugh, tears forming in his eyes. "You destroyed my marriage. For nothing." Without another word, he turned and walked out of the hospital, his heart heavier than it had ever been. Victor drove aimlessly through the city streets, his mind spinning with emotions he could barely control. Betrayal, anger, regret. Everything hit him at once. How could he have been so blind? He had destroyed his marriage, abandoned the woman who truly loved him, all for a child that wasn't even his. Tears blurred his vision as he pulled over to the side of the road. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. For the first time in his life, he felt truly lost. How had his life come to this? Just months ago he had a wife who loved him. She had been patient, understanding, and loyal despite their struggles. And how had he repaid her? By betraying her trust and throwing her away for another woman. And now, he had nothing. With a heavy heart, he decided to go home. But the moment he stepped inside, the house felt empty. Cold. Wura's presence had never made this house a home. It had always been Sarah who filled the space with love and warmth. Victor slumped onto the couch, running his hands through his hair. He couldn't stay here, not anymore. He needed to escape the suffocating guilt and pain. The next few months were unbearable. Victor cut all ties with Wura, leaving her to deal with the consequences of her deception. He withdrew from everything, his work, his friends, even his family. Then, one morning as he drove to work, he saw someone familiar on the sidewalk. His heart pounded in his chest. It was Zara. She looked radiant, more beautiful than ever, and to his shock, She was pregnant. Victor's hands tightened around the steering wheel as he pulled over quickly. He stepped out of the car and ran toward her. "Sarah!" he called out. Sarah turned slowly, her eyes widening in surprise. "Victor?" For a moment, they just stared at each other. Victor swallowed hard. How have you been?" Sarah gave him a polite smile. "I've been well, thank you." Victor's eyes dropped to her belly, and pain shot through him. She was pregnant, with someone else's child. You're having a baby," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah nodded. "Yes, I am." Victor felt a lump in his throat. "So?" "It wasn't you, it was me. I was the one with the problem, wasn't I?" Sarah sighed. "Victor, does it even matter now?" Victor felt tears sting his eyes. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I made the biggest mistake of my life." Sarah gave him a sad smile. "I forgave you a long time ago, Victor, but I've moved on." Just then a man approached, placing a protective arm around Sarah's waist. He was tall, well-dressed and confident. "My love, are you ready for our trip?" he asked Sarah, his voice warm. Sarah nodded. "Yes, I am." The man glanced at Victor. "Oh, is this the ex-husband you told me about?" Sarah simply nodded. Victor felt humiliated as the man looked him up and down before smirking. "Thank you for letting Sarah go. She's the best thing that ever happened to me." Victor felt his heart shatter. He had lost Sarah forever. As they walked away, Victor stood there, watching the love of his life slip further out of reach. And for the first time he realized what true regret felt like. Victor stood frozen on the sidewalk, watching Sarah walk away with her new husband. He felt like a man drowning in his own mistakes. The woman he had once called his wife was now happy without him. She was living the life they had once dreamed of, but with another man. Slowly he turned back toward his car and got in. As he drove away, his mind replayed every moment he had spent with Sarah. The love, the laughter, the struggles, and, ultimately, the betrayal. If only he had been patient, if only he had trusted their love instead of seeking happiness in another woman's arms. But there was no if only anymore. Days turned into weeks, and Victor fell deeper into his misery. His work suffered, his health declined, and loneliness consumed him. He refused to see friends or family, choosing instead to drown in self-pity. One evening, as he sat alone in his empty house, his phone rang. He almost ignored it, but something told him to pick up. "Hello?" His voice was weak, tired. "Victor, it's me, Wura." Victor's jaw clenched. "What do you want?" "I need your help," Wura said, her voice shaking. "My baby's father, the real one, has refused to take responsibility. I have nothing, Victor, no money, no support. I was wrong to treat you the way I did. Please, help me." Victor let out a bitter laugh. "Help you? After everything you did to me?" "I know I don't deserve it," Wura whispered, "but I have nowhere else to turn." Victor leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. The same woman who had destroyed his marriage was now begging him for help. Life truly had a cruel sense of irony. But he had learned his lesson. He wasn't going to be used again. "I'm sorry, Wura," he said, his voice firm. "You made your choices, and now you have to live with them." "But Victor..." He ended the call before she could finish. For the first time in months, he felt a strange sense of relief. He was done allowing others to ruin his life. That night, Victor decided to make a change. He couldn't undo the past, but he could rebuild his future. He sought professional help, started focusing on his career again, and even reconnected with old friends. Slowly, the fog of regret began to lift, and he started to find meaning in life again. But one thing remained true. He had lost the best thing that had ever happened to him, and no amount of change could bring Sarah back. One evening, while walking in the park, he saw Sarah again. She was with her husband, laughing as they watched a little boy, her son, play on the swings. Victor's heart ached, but this time, he didn't approach her. He simply smiled sadly and walked away, carrying the weight of his mistakes with him. Months passed, and Victor slowly pieced his life back together. Though the pain of losing Sarah still lingered, he had accepted that some mistakes could never be undone. He focused on his career, worked on becoming a better man, and learned to live with the regret that would always follow him. One evening, as he sat in his office, an old friend, David, stopped by. "Victor, we haven't seen you in months. How are you holding up?" David asked, sitting across from him. Victor sighed. "I'm managing, just trying to focus on work." David smiled. "That's good, but you can't bury yourself in work forever. Life doesn't end because of one mistake." Victor looked down. "It wasn't just one mistake, David. I threw away my marriage, my happiness, and for what? A lie." David leaned forward. "Then learn from it. You can't change the past, but you can decide how your future will be." Victor thought about that long after David left. Maybe it was time to stop punishing himself. A week later, Victor attended a charity event, something he wouldn't have considered before. He was standing by the drinks table when a soft voice spoke behind him. "Victor?" He turned around and froze. It was Sarah. She looked as beautiful as ever, her smile warm but cautious. Her pregnancy had passed, and now she carried herself with a new grace, a confidence that hadn't been there before. "I didn't expect to see you here," Sarah said. Victor swallowed hard. "Yeah, I've been trying to do better." Sarah nodded. "That's good to hear." There was an awkward silence before Victor finally said, "Sarah, I just want to say, I truly regret everything I did. If I could go back, I would change everything." Sarah looked at him for a long moment before smiling gently. "Victor, I forgave you a long time ago. Holding on to anger only holds us back." Victor felt a lump in his throat. "You really forgive me?" "Yes," she said sincerely, "but forgiveness doesn't mean things can go back to the way they were. I've moved on, and I'm happy now." Victor nodded, forcing a small smile. "I'm happy for you, Sarah. You deserve the best." Sarah smiled. "So do you. Just remember, your past doesn't define you. What you do next does." With that, she walked away, back to her husband and child, leaving Victor standing there with a strange mix of emotions. For the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of peace. He knew now that he couldn't change what had happened, but he could decide what kind of man he wanted to be moving forward. Taking a deep breath, Victor walked out of the event, ready to start a new chapter in his life, not one driven by regret, but by hope. Thank you for watching. Please like, share and subscribe.